Welcome back to The Point. We're talking with Representative Aric Nesbitt. You represent Van Buren County and part of Allegan County.
That's correct. Yep.
Let's talk a little bit about year two for the Snyder administration. This is going to be an interesting time this week. We know the State of the State's coming up. Revenue Estimating Conference has just come out. A little bit extra money, don't know exactly how much, but there are differences in Lansing from what there were 12 months ago. First of all, let's talk about what didn't get done on the governor's agenda. There is no cement being poured for a new bridge in Detroit. That was probably one of his biggest losses last year. Would you agree?
Well, I mean, it depends on how you look at it in terms of a loss or not. I mean, there's a difference of opinion. Different business organizations have different feelings about it.
A loss from the governor's standpoint because
for the governor, but that's
yeah.
a political talk. It's not a policy issues that we're talking about. And there's things that we've continued to accomplish. A lot of the big things. I mean, working on a 2-year budget plan. I mean, this year as we produce this budget, that we already have kind of a roadmap from last year's budget if we can follow that. I mean, we took a lot of hard decisions, $1.5 billion in cuts and reforms, passed the budget the earliest it's been in 30 years, concentrating on job creation with the budget reforms, the tax reforms, and the regulatory reforms that we worked on. This year, I'd like to see more in terms of the litigation side, some tort reform issues. Also, there's a lot of long-term liabilities. Michigan has $50 billion in long-term liabilities that we don't know how to pay for. We started on some last year and putting some down payments from the one-time revenue expectations that we had last year. We also did some changes in terms of public employee health care accounts. We took away our own health care for retirement. And so I think there's a lot of work still to do. And when we get back, we're going to start dealing with some more of the pension issues and trying to get to a more sustainable level so that we're not passing along to our children and grandchildren more debt than what they came in.
I want to go back to the bridge in just a minute, but you brought up something very interesting. When you talk about $50 billion in unfunded liabilities that the state has moving forward for retirement and health care and other issues, to put that in perspective, that is more than an entire year's budget. But an entire year's budget also relies heavily on a lot of federal money that comes in. So it's far more than the state is going to be taking in a 12-month calendar year. So that's a significant amount of debt that the state is carrying. And some could suggest that it would even be unconstitutional since you can't have an unbalanced budget and the state isn't supposed to have debt.
Well, and this is, what direction do we go? I mean, you see at the federal level in terms of the deficits they're running, 42 cents out of every dollar they spend at the federal level. You see Greece and Italy and the deficits and the debts that they've accumulated and built up. Here in Michigan, we have an option of making the hard decisions today so we don't end up like Greece or Italy 10, 15 years down. You know, we just got through Christmas. In Christmas time, what is it? The children want something and the parents pay for it. Well, it seems like the last few years, whether it was in Washington or even in Lansing before this, that it was that the parents was, give me this and we'll let the kids pay for it. Times like that are over. We're making the tough decisions that are need be. Revenue estimates are good. They're not great. We don't know what's going to happen on the international scale in terms of jobs and the economy. We've structurally made the changes here in Michigan that our credit ratings slightly going up, that Bloomberg has reported that Michigan has a lot of potential in terms of future job growth. And so we're putting it in place in terms of the jobs and the economy picture so that we have a more stable budget for going into the future. And so I think that's going to be important as we deal with this next year's budget. And we're going to get it done earlier than we've done in the past. Last year we got it done the earliest it's been done in 30 years. I was talking to a school board member yesterday, and they're like, just give us some predictability. And they liked it, last year, even though they didn't like some of the cuts that happened. They like some of the tools we provided in terms of savings to make them more structurally sound, and they also like the fact that it was passed before their July 1st budget started to go into effect.
One of the biggest complaints you heard from school administrators in years past that, look, we've got to know how much money we're going to have to spend. If you don't get a budget done until September or October or later, it makes it tough. Although you didn't hear as much of that when it got done early because their concerns then were what they perceived as cuts that were too deep in the school budget, which may be mitigated somewhat if the revenue projections stay where they are. But we're going to talk about the budget in a minute. I'm going to go back to the bridge. The reason I started with the bridge is that that is one of the things that the governor laid out in last year's State of the State. It was a surprise to most of the people in that chamber. Speaker of the House pointedly said in a forum I hosted on Mackinac Island that he didn't stand up In other words, he did not stand up, and the reason he did not stand up was not because of gravity. But the fact of the matter is that bridge is still a very controversial issue within the legislature. Governor simply didn't have the votes to make it happen in this last session, but he's not done with that bridge. Are you in the legislature going to have to deal, you in the House didn't have to deal with it last time around. Are you going to have to deal with it this time?
Well, we'll see. I mean, it's been in the Senate. That's the area it's been. I mean, you read one set of articles and they're saying that it's necessary and it's needed. You read another set and it's not necessary and needed. So it's our job as legislators to try to work through this. I have a concern in terms of, I have a few concerns of whether or not the revenues from the tolls will actually come in as need be, and the rest of the state will get stuck with the money. I know that the proponents of the bridge say that we can use it as matching funds to draw down federal dollars to help build other infrastructure projects around the state. How do we know that that isn't changed with the next budget, or changed at the next authorization at the federal level for transportation and highway funding? So these are questions I need to answer. And also, if there's a private individual willing to make investments in a second span, then should we be facilitating that in terms of a public-private partnership or not? And is there going to be fair competition between a private owner of the bridge and the public owner? Are they, if the toll revenues don't come as expected, are they going to redirect traffic away from the surface streets in Windsor to the public bridge instead of the private bridge? So these are all questions that, on a policy question, that need to be answered, and I know there's certain folks that are supplying different information. I continue to ask questions and work through the issues. But I have concerns.
From the administration standpoint, the new bridge would be a private bridge. They would use the federal drawdown and that for the infrastructure on either end, but the bridge itself would be paid for, they say, by private funds, just as a matter of what their position is. But the bridge leads me to the larger question about what's going to happen in Southeast Michigan, because first of all, we heard about the bridge in last year's State of the State. Just a few weeks ago, we heard that the city of Detroit was going to be bankrupt, out of cash by spring. Now the mayor says that's not going to happen, but it doesn't negate the fact that the city of Detroit is in very serious financial trouble. Maybe the bridge is part of this component, maybe it is not. But at some point this year, the state government is likely to take some action to put the state of Michigan further involved with the city government of Detroit. How troublesome is that for you as a state?
Well, I mean, I ran on fiscal accountability, and this is what's needed. My sister, she's a school teacher, elementary school teacher in Southwest Detroit in Mexican Town. When visiting her, you see the changes that has happened over the past 50 years. 50 years ago, there was nearly 2 million people in Detroit. Today, there's just over 700,000 individuals in Detroit. And Detroit right now has $10 billion in debt. It's estimated $10 to $12 billion. And right now they're going a review. And it's going to be the next 60, 90 days, it looks like, when the team will issue a report that the treasurer appointed, that they're reviewing the city's books. The last thing we want is bankruptcy and failure in the city of Detroit. So the emergency manager law that was passed a year ago, that might be on the ballot this fall, that has been successful in the city of Benton Harbor. They're running a $400,000 budget surplus now. It looks like the next 4 to 6 months they're going to be, the emergency manager is going to be leaving the city. E-Course has reported their first surplus since 2005. They haven't had a deficit in the past. And so this is a big question in terms of our largest city in Michigan. So the last thing we need is failure in Detroit. You're talking $1,100 for every man, woman, and child in terms of the debt that's been accumulated in Detroit. And I don't want the folks in the rest of the state to be hit with that bill. We need to work with the city of Detroit as a partnership and work them through this financial situation so they can get back on the growth method. And it's about the changes we made at the state level, the changes we made in the tax policy, in terms of predictability in the budget, and the regulations of saying we're open for business and let's start rebuilding our state.
But if the people in the city of Detroit don't want the help, and they've made it pretty clear, or at least some of the leadership has made it clear that they don't, aren't the people in the state of Michigan already on the hook? I mean, they already get 50 cents of every revenue sharing dollar that goes in there, and they say that the state still owes them a couple $100 million that they didn't get. And what happens to the city of Detroit as far as economics impacts the entire state of Michigan. So aren't we as a state already joined to Detroit and their financial problems?
Well, revenue sharing in terms of, the Detroit gets about $260 per person, $280 per person. My area gets about $80 per person or so. continue to reward failure and punish success. And this is an area where, you know, we need to get away from rewarding failure. And that means that, yeah, we all have a responsibility in the state to make sure that Detroit succeeds. And I think this will mean, if need be, that, you know, when the review comes back, whether or not that it's going to be appropriate for us to find an emergency manager. I hope that isn't the case. I hope the city leaders will make the right financial decisions to work them out of this mess. But if it isn't, it's incumbent upon the legislature and the governor to ensure that the taxpayers in the state of Michigan are protected and that the job creators in the state of Michigan are protected, to make sure that we can continue to fix Lansing and get Michigan back to work.
A little later this week, it's going to be a full house over in the House chamber, because we'll have everybody who is elected from the State House and the State Senate, the Supreme Court, and guests and a number of others that are going to sit down and listen to the governor's second State of the State address. And that first one, as I said, he rolled out a number of initiatives. By and large, they were dealt with in one form or another as it went through the budget process. He did a lot of the things that he set out to do. A couple of things, the bridge most notably, did not happen. What do you expect, and or what would you like to hear him talk about? Because the reason I brought up the part about Detroit is it seems almost certain he has to talk about Detroit in some fashion, because that's going to be on the plate for the legislature some way or another this year. But beyond that, if you agree that you think he may talk about Detroit, what would you like to hear him say, or what do you expect to hear him say?
Well, we talked earlier about the $50 billion of unfunded liabilities. I'd like to hear the governor continue to talk about how we're going to address these unfunded liabilities going in the future and start to transition over to a more sustainable form. Talk about how we're going to reach, again, a 2-year balanced budget in terms of moving the ball forward. Also, I'd like to hear more on terms of the litigation front, how we're going to do tort reform to allow, you know, doctors to be able to, you know, come into Michigan and be able to do their job without worry some of these junk lawsuits that happen. And I'd also like to hear more conversation in terms of how we're going to deal with, you know, the business equipment tax, or what some people call personal property tax, and how we're going to be able to, again, be a hub of manufacturing in the state. One other area that I think Michigan has a key area of is energy. And I know he has a special message, I believe, in March or April of this year on energy. I'm chairing the natural gas subcommittee, going to be planning and issuing the report in the coming weeks. But natural gas is at its lowest point it's been for
right.
years. And it continues to come down, and we have a lot of potential up in northern Michigan in terms of natural gas production and in terms of the jobs and employment that comes from that. We're a manufacturing state. 98% of all manufactured products come in contact with natural gas. And so we're finally seeing, in terms of the energy perspective, some employment and some energy independence perspective that we can get back, you know, Michigan back to work. And I think energy is an important key.
Representative, there's so much more I'd like to talk to you about, but we're out of time. Come back and join us. We'll talk after the budget presentation and see how things are going in Lansing then. Thank you very much.
Absolutely, Rick. Thanks. My pleasure.
We're back with more To the Point in just a moment.